An emperor's most trusted protectors spoke a language he could not understand. For over 3 centuries, the rulers of the Byzantine Empire placed their personal safety and their throne in the hands of foreign warriors known as the Varangian Guard. By the end of this story, you will understand the brilliant, ruthless logic behind one of history's most unusual bargains for loyalty. Why would a sovereign distrust his own people so deeply that he would hire outsiders as his personal shield? And what did these Norse warriors gain from a life spent guarding a distant, glittering city? How do you build absolute trust when you share neither blood nor culture? The throne of Constantinople was a perilous seat, and no one knew this better than Basil II. He had barely survived a brutal civil war, a conflict not against a foreign invader, but against his own military elite. These powerful generals and landowners, known as the Dynatoi, had grown too strong. Their loyalty was not to the emperor, but to their own family ambitions and vast provincial estates. They commanded private armies, they influenced politics, and they saw the imperial crown as a prize to be won, not a sacred office to be protected. For Basil, surviving the war was only the first challenge. The real question was how to rule afterward. How could he secure his power when the very men sworn to defend the empire were the ones most likely to try and seize it from him? He needed soldiers, but more importantly, he needed guardsmen whose only connection to Byzantine society was their connection to him. He needed a military solution that was also a political masterstroke. His gaze turned north beyond the frontiers of his realm, to the world of the Rus and the distant Norse. There he saw a resource that his rivals could not corrupt, warriors whose concept of loyalty was direct, personal, and famously unbreakable once pledged. They fought for glory and for wealth, not for a plot of land or a political alliance within the empire. This was the genesis of the bargain. Basil's desperation for security met the Norse tradition of honorable service, and from that meeting the Varangian Guard was formally born. It was a calculated risk, trading the familiar danger of local betrayal for the unknown quantity of foreign loyalty. The answer arrived not from the frozen fjords of Norway, but from the forested riverlands to the north. Emperor Basil sent his appeal to Prince Vladimir of Kiev, ruler of the powerful state known as Kievan Rus. This was not a random choice. The Rus were themselves descendants of Norse adventurers who had traveled east generations earlier, settling among Slavic populations and building a formidable trading empire along the great rivers. They were, in a sense, culturally bilingual, steeped in the warrior traditions of the north, while also understanding the complex political landscape of the East. Basil proposed a deal, one that mixed military necessity with dynastic ambition. In exchange for a permanent core of elite fighters, Basil offered something priceless to Vladimir, a marriage alliance with the Byzantine imperial family. For a ruler whose realm was still seen as a newcomer on the stage of Christian kingdoms, a marriage tie to the ancient Roman throne was a monumental boost in prestige and legitimacy. Vladimir agreed. The initial shipment of trust sent south to Constantinople consisted of 6,000 hand-picked Rus warriors. Think about that number for a moment. 6,000 was not a small retinue, it was a small army. These were not young men seeking adventure. They were an established military force, veterans likely accustomed to the rhythms of campaign and the weight of their weapons. They arrived already familiar with the journey, having navigated the Dnieper River and the Black Sea routes for years as traders and occasional mercenaries. They brought with them a fearsome reputation for physical prowess and a cultural code where an oath, once sworn, was considered unbreakable, a matter of eternal honor. This made them the perfect raw material for Basil's vision. They had no prior loyalties within the Byzantine court, no family connections to the scheming generals, and their commitment was, by design, a transaction. Their loyalty was to the emperor who paid them, and in return he received a shield that his own nobility could not penetrate. These 6,000 men became the living nucleus of the Varangian Guard, the first chapter in a story that would last for centuries. But a question immediately presents itself. What was life actually like for these northern warriors in the heart of a Mediterranean empire? The promise of service in Constantinople became a siren song heard across the north. News did not travel through official decrees but through the stories told in smoky longhouses and at bustling trading posts, tales of gold so plentiful it was measured by the armful, and of honor bestowed directly by a ruler who was like a living god. This created a self-sustaining system, a human current flowing steadily from the Scandinavian homelands toward the fabled city on the Bosphorus. Young men with ambition but no inheritance, warriors who had fought one too many local feuds, or simply those hungry for a life beyond the fjords, they all saw the same path to glory. They called this journey going into the east, and it became a rite of passage for generations. The route itself was an epic adventure, a months-long trek that tested a warrior's mettle long before he ever saw an enemy's shield wall. From Swedish trading centers like Birka, they would sail across the Baltic, then drag their ships overland on log rollers between river systems, a back-breaking labor known as portage. The great rivers of the east, the Dnieper and the Volga, became their highways south. These were not empty waterways, they were vibrant, dangerous commercial corridors, lined with Slavic settlements, Pecheneg nomads, and rival bands of traders. A journey down the Dnieper meant navigating a series of treacherous rapids, places with names like Do Not Sleep and The Insatiable, where the river roared through narrow gorges and hidden rocks could smash a longship to splinters. Many a hopeful guardsman lost his life and his fortune to these churning waters before he ever caught a glimpse of the Golden Horn. This constant influx fundamentally changed the character of the Guard. While the initial core under Basil were ruse warriors, culturally mixed from generations in the east, the new recruits were fresh from the north. They brought with them the pure, unadulterated traditions of the Norse, their language, their gods like Thor and Odin, and their unmistakable appearance. In Constantinople, they would have stood out dramatically, towering over the local population with their fair hair, intricate arm rings, and the distinctive broad-bladed axes that became their trademark weapon. The Guard evolved into a Scandinavian island within a Greek sea, a self-contained brotherhood that maintained its own customs, laws, and even its own place of worship. They were not immigrants seeking to assimilate, they were professionals maintaining a distinct identity, which was precisely why the emperors valued them. Their separation from local society was not a bug in the system, it was the core feature. For a young man from Uppsala or Hedeby, reaching Constantinople was like stepping into a legend made real. The scale was incomprehensible. The city's population was larger than that of their entire homeland. The stone architecture, the massive hippodrome, the towering dome of the Hagia Sophia, all of it was designed to stun and humble. And at the center of it all was the great palace itself, a labyrinth of marble and gold where they would take their oath. The ceremony was solemn and binding. A new guardsman would lay his hands on the hilt of a special sword kept for this purpose, swearing loyalty directly to the emperor, not to the empire or its people. The pay was as legendary as the stories promised, a regular salary of solid gold coins, a fortune that could set up a man for life if he survived his service. They were given their distinctive equipment, a gilded helmet and a long, heavy axe, and were stationed at key points throughout the palace complex. Their primary duty was clear, to stand as an immovable barrier between the emperor and any threat, especially those that came from within his own court. They were the final, unquestioning line of defense in a world where questioning was a constant political sport. But what happened when these famed axes were not just for ceremony, but were called upon to swing in anger. That oath was not just a formality, it was the entire foundation of their service. In the Norse world, a warrior's word was his life. The concept they brought with them was called comitatus, a bond of mutual obligation between a leader and his chosen retinue. The Lord provided wealth, protection, and a share of glory. In return, the warriors pledged their lives to his defense, a promise that lasted until their own end. This was not patriotism in any modern sense, nor was it a religious crusade. It was a deeply personal contract of honor between men. When a Varangian laid his hand on that ceremonial sword in Constantinople, he was transferring that ancient northern code onto a distant, jeweled throne. He was not swearing to defend an abstract idea of the Roman Empire. He was swearing to protect the man who sat upon it, the emperor himself. This distinction is crucial. It meant their loyalty could not be bought by a rival general offering a bigger estate, or swayed by a theological argument from a powerful bishop. They were gloriously, perfectly uninterested in the internal politics of the empire. A plot to overthrow the emperor was not a complex political maneuver to them. It was a direct violation of their sworn word, an insult to their personal honor that could only be answered with the edge of an axe. This created a psychological firewall around the imperial person. For the emperors, this was the system's greatest strength. A Greek soldier from a prominent family in Anatolia might have uncles in the Senate and cousins in the church, a web of loyalties that could pull him in different directions during a crisis. A Varangian guardsman had one connection in the entire empire, the chain of command that led directly to the throne. His comrades were his new clan, and his emperor was his chieftain. This insulation from local society was a feature, not a bug. It is why emperors trusted them with the most sensitive tasks, from guarding the palace bedchamber to escorting vast shipments of imperial gold. They were the ultimate neutral party in a court teeming with factions. Their famed axes were not just weapons, they were the physical manifestation of that unbreakable oath, a guarantee that in a world of whispers and schemes, one thing remained brutally simple, absolute, and direct. This was the emperor's cold, brilliant calculation. The Byzantine Empire possessed one of the most advanced and formidable military systems of its time, a complex network of professional armies known as themes, each responsible for defending a specific region of the vast territory. These forces were led by Greek generals who were masters of strategy, steeped in the ancient military texts of Rome and Greece. On paper, this system was a masterpiece of organization. In the halls of the Great Palace, however, it presented a constant, simmering danger. The problem was not competence but connection. A Greek general was never just a soldier. He was the head of a prominent family, a landowner with vast estates, a man whose brothers might be bishops and whose cousins might be senators. His loyalty was divided from the start, stretched between his duty to the emperor and his obligations to his own lineage and its ambitions. In a moment of crisis, during a rebellion or a sudden power vacuum, which loyalty would win out, history had shown time and again that it was often the call of blood and legacy. The throne itself was the ultimate prize, and the path to seizing it was commanded by an army. So an emperor surveying his own military saw not just defenders, but a gallery of potential rivals. The Varangian Guard solved this political equation with elegant simplicity. A guardsman from Norway or Sweden had no family in the Senate to pressure him. He owned no estates in Anatolia that could be threatened by a rival faction. He had no path to the imperial throne, not even in the wildest dream, for he was neither Greek nor Roman in the eyes of the court or the people. His presence in the empire had a single purpose defined by a single oath. This made him a blank slate, a vessel for loyalty that the emperor could fill with his own authority. They were the perfect counterbalance, a dedicated force whose very existence checked the power of the native aristocracy. When a Greek general entered the throne room, He now had to pass between rows of towering axemen whose allegiance he could not buy, whose language he likely did not speak, and whose only command came from the man sitting on the throne he might covet. It was a daily, silent reminder of where true power resided. The system created a balance of fear, but for the emperor, it was the fear of others that kept him secure. Yet this arrangement only worked if the Varangians themselves remained content, and their satisfaction hinged on a currency more tangible than honor. Gold was the glue that bound this oath. A Varangian guardsman did not receive a modest stipend or a grant of farmland. He was paid in pure, tangible wealth, the famous solid gold coins known as numismata. His salary was a fortune by any standard, delivered with reliable regularity from the imperial treasury. This was not just compensation for service, it was a continuous, powerful reminder of the bargain. Every heavy coin in his palm was a direct gift from the emperor himself, a personal transaction that reinforced their bond far more effectively than any abstract pledge to the state. The wealth did not stop at a regular salary. When the guard marched to war alongside the emperor, they fought at the very front, a place of utmost danger and corresponding honor. From that position, they claimed the choicest share of the spoils after a victory, the richest silks, the finest weapons, the heaviest golden ornaments from enemy tents. But the most extraordinary financial tradition was reserved for the end of an emperor's reign. Upon the ruler's passing, the Varangians held an ancient rite called pelota. They were permitted to enter the imperial palace and take as their own treasures from the personal quarters of the deceased emperor. Picture that scene for a moment. These northern warriors, moving through the opulent private rooms of the world's most powerful man, selecting golden chalices, jeweled belts, or silken robes as their rightful due. This practice was breathtaking in its symbolic power. It demonstrated a trust so complete that the new emperor, the successor, allowed these foreigners to rummage through the most intimate symbols of his predecessor's authority. It proved they were not mere servants but stakeholders. Their loyalty was rewarded not with a pension but with a literal share of the imperial legacy. This river of gold did not stay in Constantinople. A significant portion of it traveled the long river roads back to the north. Archaeologists in Scandinavia have unearthed vast hoards of Byzantine coins, ornate silver cups from the Mediterranean, and fragments of silk that once lined palace walls. These treasures, buried in the soil of Sweden or Norway, were the ultimate advertisement. They were physical proof of the legends told by returning veterans, solid evidence that the streets of Miklagard, the Norse name for Constantinople, truly were paved with gold. This turned service in the guard into the ultimate career for a young Norse noble. It was a pathway to wealth that could elevate an entire family standing back home, allowing a man to build a great hall, commission a decorated ship, and secure his name in the sagas. Their economic dependence was absolute and perfectly designed. A guardsman's breathtaking wealth flowed from one source only, the favor and stability of the emperor on the throne. A civil war or a successful coup would not just be a political disturbance, it would be a direct threat to their personal fortune and their future legacy. Their axes protected the emperor, but in a very real sense, they were also protecting their own investment. This created a circle of loyalty that was both honorable and impeccably practical. The emperor purchased loyalty with gold and privilege, and the Varangians, by defending the source of that gold, guaranteed the continuation of their own prestigious lives. It was a system where trust and self-interest were not in conflict but were perfectly, powerfully aligned. Their foreignness was not a barrier to be overcome, it was the very foundation of their trustworthiness. Imagine a court where every whisper could be a coded message, where a glance across a crowded room could signal conspiracy, and where family loyalties stretched back for generations. To navigate this world, you needed fluency not just in Greek, but in the unspoken language of Byzantine politics. the Varangians were blissfully, strategically illiterate in this second language. They could not easily speak Greek, especially in those early decades, and the complex social rituals of the court were a mystery to them. While the empire was fervently Christian, many of the early guardsmen still held to the Old Norse gods, making the theological debates that often fueled political factions seem like distant, irrelevant noise. This cultural isolation created an impenetrable bubble around them. A scheming senator could not casually befriend a Varangian over wine to plant seeds of dissent because they moved in different social orbits. A disgruntled general could not appeal to a shared homeland or a mutual acquaintance because the guardsman's homeland was a world away and his only mutual acquaintance was the emperor. This made them the perfect vessel for confidential information. An emperor could speak plainly to his Varangian captain about his suspicions, his plans, or his fears, knowing the words would travel no further. The message would not be filtered through the lens of family interest or accidentally revealed to a cousin in the clergy or become fodder for the palace gossip mill. It would simply be received and acted upon, a direct command from a chieftain to his sworn man. In a system drowning in subtlety, their greatest value was their sublime simplicity. They were not just bodyguards, they were a living, breathing security protocol, human firewalls who operated entirely outside the vulnerable software of Byzantine society. Their outsider status, which might have been a weakness in any other context, was here forged into an ultimate strength. But this unique position also meant that when violence erupted, their role was terrifyingly straightforward. This warrior psychology was forged in the shield wall, a formation that demanded absolute cohesion. In the north, a man's worth was measured not by the cleverness of his retreat, but by the steadfastness of his feet. To hold your ground, to protect the man to your left and right, to feel the collective push and roar of the line, this was the essence of their military identity. It was a mindset of immovable defense, a living fortress of interlocked shields and shared breath. This cultural instinct translated with perfect, brutal clarity to their new role in Constantinople. Byzantine generals were masters of the feigned withdrawal, the strategic delay, the complex maneuver that traded space for future advantage. These were brilliant tactics for winning campaigns. But they were useless for the singular task of protecting an emperor's life in a moment of crisis. In that moment, what the ruler needed was not a strategist but an unbreakable wall. He needed the psychological certainty that the line would not bend, that the door would not yield, that the last stand would be exactly that. The Varangian ethos provided this certainty in its purest form. Their commitment was not to winning a battle in the abstract, but to fulfilling the specific, physical promise of their oath, to place their bodies between their lord and harm. In the narrow corridors of the great palace or on the chaotic flank of a battlefield, there was no room for elaborate tactics. There was only the simplicity of the stand. This created a powerful, almost tangible aura of security. For an emperor surrounded by political uncertainty, the presence of these men was a constant reassurance. They were not calculating odds or considering the political fallout of a fight. They were mentally and physically prepared to meet any threat with the same direct, overwhelming response. Their value lay in this terrifying predictability. While a Byzantine officer might see a charging enemy and think about regrouping on higher ground, a Varangian saw only a violation of the perimeter he was sworn to hold. His training, his honor, his entire world, you compelled him to meet that charge, axe in hand, and stop it dead. This made them the ultimate psychological deterrent within the palace as well. A conspirator knew that bribing or reasoning with these guards was nearly impossible. They were not participants in the court's game of whispers, they were the unmovable rules of the game itself. Their very presence declared that any attempt on the emperor would have to go through a barrier that did not negotiate, did not hesitate, and did not step aside. It was a form of security that was as much about perception as it was about physical force. The emperor slept easier not just because strong men stood at his door, but because those men embodied an ethos where letting that door be breached was an inconceivable failure. This cultural alignment, where the Norse ideal of heroic defense met the emperor's desperate need for absolute protection, was the final, perfect piece of the puzzle. It meant the god was not just a hired tool, but a living extension of the ruler's own will to survive. The signature weapon of the Varangian god was a statement carved from steel and oak. It was the massive two-handed axe, a design often called the Dane axe, and its purpose extended far beyond the battlefield. In the hands of a Byzantine infantryman, a spear or sword was a tool of war. In the hands of a Varangian, the great axe was a symbol of singular, terrifying authority. Its design was brutally simple, a long haft of ash wood, often as tall as a man, topped with a broad, crescent-shaped blade. This was not a tool for delicate fencing or quick thrusts. It was a weapon of overwhelming force, designed to cleave through shields, shatter armor, and break the momentum of any charge with one devastating swing. The choice of this weapon was deeply intentional. While the elite Byzantine cavalry, the cataphracts, were celebrated for their speed and lance work, and the infantry for their disciplined formations, the axe represented something different, something raw and uncompromising. It was the weapon of the executioner, not the duelist. Its very presence in the palace guard communicated a grim reality. These men were not there to engage in a fair fight. They were there to end a threat decisively and with finality. Imagine the scene in the throne room. Flanking the basileus, the emperor, would be a line of these northern giants, each resting the butt of his long axe on the polished marble floor, the gleaming blade hovering at shoulder height. The formation was both practical and profoundly psychological. In a confined space, a spear could be grabbed, a sword could be parried. But the sweeping arc of that heavy axe created a deadly zone around the emperor that was impossible to cross without invitation. It sent a clear, silent message to every courtier, general, and ambassador who approached, a reminder that the ultimate sanction in this empire was not a complex legal decree, but a swift, physical act administered by men who asked no questions. On parade through the streets of Constantinople, the sight was equally potent. The guard would march with their axes resting on their shoulders, a moving forest of polished steel that caught the sun. For the citizens, it was a spectacle of imperial might. For any potential conspirator in the crowd, it was a calculated display of the consequences of treason. The axe was more than a tool, it was a non-verbal language. It said that the emperor's will was backed not by the nuanced loyalty of subjects, but by the direct, purchasable force of outsiders who had no stake in any outcome except his survival. In this way, the weapon became an extension of the political bargain itself, a physical manifestation of the cold logic that governed the guard's existence. Its edge was sharp, its application was simple, and its loyalty was never in doubt. Their axes were a symbol of power, but their presence was a daily performance. The Varangian guard did not wait in the shadows for a crisis to prove their worth. They were a constant, visible pillar of the imperial theater of state. Every formal occasion was an opportunity to display the unshakable might of the throne, and the guardsmen were the lead actors in this spectacle. When foreign ambassadors were granted an audience, they did not simply walk into a room to meet the emperor. They navigated a carefully choreographed journey of intimidation and awe. First, they would pass through the outer courtyards of the great palace, seeing the intricate mosaics and flowing fountains designed to impress with wealth. Then, as they approached the throne room itself, the atmosphere shifted. The gilded luxury gave way to a corridor of silent, motionless giants. Rows of Varangians stood at perfect attention, their polished mail shirts shimmering, their great axes held upright like iron standards. The ambassadors would walk this gauntlet of northern stairs, hearing only the echo of their own footsteps and the faint clink of armor. By the time they reached the emperor, seated on his elevated throne and surrounded by more of these impassive sentinels, any thought of defiance or deceit had often been utterly crushed. The message was not subtle. You are in the presence of a power that commands the loyalty of the most formidable warriors on earth, and that power tolerates no disrespect. This ceremonial role transformed them from mere protectors into living icons of imperial authority, their foreign features and fearsome weapons becoming as much a part of the empire's official image as the double-headed eagle on its banners. Yet when the ceremony ended, their work was often just beginning. The same absolute trust that made them perfect ceremonial guards also made them the emperor's most reliable instruments for delicate, dangerous tasks within the empire itself. They became the trusted hands for actions that required both discretion and undeniable force, operations where using local troops might spark rumors or family vendettas. If a high-ranking general or a wealthy senator was suspected of treason, it was often Varangians who were sent to make the arrest. Their arrival at a nobleman's villa was a terrifying sight, precisely because it was so politically neutral. They were not rivals settling a score, they were impersonal agents of the throne's justice, there to carry out an order without debate or sympathy. This detachment made them effective and, for the emperor, safe. There would be no last-minute plea from a cousin or a hidden bargain struck at the door, only the execution of a command. Their duties extended into the financial life of the empire as well. The emperor occasionally levied special taxes, often to fund a military campaign or an urgent building project. Collecting these funds from powerful, reluctant landowners was a task fraught with conflict. Sending a tax collector with a few clerks was an invitation for delay and obstruction. Sending that same official with a squadron of Varangian guardsmen was a very different proposition. The presence of the axes transformed a negotiation into an instruction. The guards said nothing, they simply stood as a physical guarantee that the emperor's word was final. In this role, they were not just bodyguards but the muscle of the state's bureaucracy, ensuring that the will of the throne materialized into actual gold and grain. And when the empire went to war, the guards' role evolved once more. They were not typically used to garrison distant forts or patrol quiet borders. They were a strategic reserve of shock troops, the emperor's personal hammer. In major battles, they were often held back until a critical moment, then unleashed as a single, devastating force against the enemy's strongest position, or at a point where the Byzantine line was wavering. Their charge was a thing of raw, psychological terror. The sight of these enormous men roaring in a Norse battle cry, their long axes swinging in great arcs, could break the spirit of an opposing formation before the first blow even landed. They fought with the ferocity of men whose honor was directly tied to the emperor's survival on the field. A victory was a testament to their loyalty. A defeat would mean the loss of their patron and the end of their privileged world. This combination of ceremonial display, political enforcement, and battlefield shock made them the multi-purpose tool of Byzantine power. They were the one instrument in the imperial toolkit that was always sharp, always loyal, and always ready for any task, from the silent intimidation of a throne room to the deafening chaos of a collapsing enemy line. Their value lay in this incredible versatility, proving that the emperor's investment in foreign loyalty yielded dividends far beyond the security of his bedchamber. The ultimate test of this northern oath came not in a palace corridor, but on the bloodied plain outside the city of Dyrrhachium. The year was 1081, and the empire was tearing itself apart in a civil war. A young, ambitious general named Alexios Komnenos had marched on Constantinople, forcing the aging emperor Nikephoros III to abdicate. But seizing the capital was only the first move. Securing the throne required defeating the armies still loyal to the old regime. Alexios, now crowned emperor, led his forces west to confront them, and at his side stood his Varangian guard. The battle that followed would become a defining legend, not for its strategy, but for the terrifying depth of loyalty it revealed. As the lines clashed, the fighting descended into a brutal, chaotic struggle. The Varangians, positioned at the heart of Alexios's formation, became a fixed point of ferocious resistance. They fought with the grim determination of men who knew their new emperor's survival was the only guarantee of their own future. Then, a catastrophe of misinformation swept through their ranks. A rumor, swift and devastating as a sword stroke, reached them, the word that Emperor Alexios had been struck down and killed on the field. In any other unit, such news would have triggered a rout, a desperate scramble for self-preservation. For the Varangians, it triggered something else entirely, a collective resolve born from their unique code. Their oath was not to a winning side or a living cause, it was to the person of the emperor. If that person was gone, their sworn duty was not to negotiate or flee, but to follow him in honor. They made a choice that seems incomprehensible to a modern mind. They chose to die. Closing ranks, they fought on, not for victory, but for a worthy end. Their stand became a suicidal last charge, a deliberate march into the enemy's spears to join their fallen lord. The reality, of course, was that Alexios was very much alive. The rumor was false, but the psychological truth of that moment was more powerful than any fact. When Alexios himself, realizing the disaster unfolding, galloped into the thick of the fight to show his men he lived, the effect was electric. The gods' despair transformed instantly into a roaring, renewed fury. Their emperor was not dead, their oath was not broken, and their reason to fight was restored with overwhelming force. That day at Dyrrhachium did more than help win a battle. It wrote a lesson in blood and gold for every emperor who would follow. Alexios Komnenos witnessed firsthand that he possessed a force that would literally fight to the last man on the strength of a promise, even a mistaken one. It was the ultimate validation of the system, proof that the cultural engine imported from the north produced a loyalty so absolute it defied the basic instinct for survival. For Alexios, a ruler who had just seized power through force and would need every tool to keep it, the message was clear. The Varangian Guard was not an expense. It was the single most valuable insurance policy in the empire. Their fanaticism, as demonstrated that day, was the bedrock upon which his precarious new dynasty could be built. This legendary episode cemented their reputation not just as elite soldiers, but as metaphysical guardians, men whose commitment transcended the immediate logic of the battlefield. It showed that for the right price and the right bond of honor, an emperor could purchase something priceless, a shield that would not bend, even when all hope seemed lost. Even the stone walls of the Hagia Sophia hold echoes of their voices. High in the galleries of that magnificent cathedral, where the air hums with the chants of Greek liturgy and the light streams through countless windows, a visitor with a keen eye can find a different kind of prayer etched into the marble. It is not a cross or a saintly icon, but a series of sharp, angular slashes, the runic alphabet of the north. One of the most famous reads simply, Halfdan carved these runes. That single line, carved by a homesick guardsman over 9 centuries ago, speaks volumes. It is a whisper of identity in a sea of foreign splendor, a defiant act of memory. Halfdan did not write in Greek or Latin, the languages of empire and church. He used the script of his ancestors, a writing system meant for wood and stone, not parchment. In doing so, he left behind a poignant signature of the gods' dual existence. They walked the polished floors of the world's most sophisticated city, but a part of them remained firmly rooted in the world of fjords and sagas. This cultural persistence was a conscious choice nurtured by their unique circumstances. The Guard lived together in their own quarter of the city, likely near the Great Palace, forming a self-contained Scandinavian enclave. They would have heard their own language spoken daily, shared stories of home, and practiced their own customs. The runes on the Hagia Sophia suggest some were even literate in their own tradition, a rarity in a largely oral culture. This maintenance of a separate identity was not an accident of history, it was essential to their function. That very language barrier, which might seem like a handicap, was in fact a key component of their reliability. Because they moved through Byzantine society without fully integrating into it, they remained gloriously isolated from the intricate webs of local gossip, family obligation, and political faction. A complex theological debate in the Senate meant nothing to a man whose spiritual world was still populated by the old gods of Asgard. A subtle insult between two aristocratic families would sail right past a guardsman who lacked the cultural fluency to catch its meaning. Their linguistic separation acted as a permanent filter, straining out the subtle poisons of court politics and leaving only the clear, direct commands of their imperial employer. They were not just physically guarding the emperor, they were cognitively guarding themselves against the influences that could compromise a local soldier. Every rune carved, every Norse oath sworn among themselves, every familiar song sung in their barracks reinforced this vital detachment. They were permanent residents who chose to remain perpetual outsiders because in that outsider status lay their supreme value to the throne. The stone of Constantinople bore their marks, but the society of Constantinople could never truly claim their hearts. But the runes of Halfdan spoke of an older world, a world slowly being left behind. The spiritual landscape of Constantinople was a powerful, all-encompassing force, and over generations, it reshaped the men who came to serve. The journey from the worship of Thor to the embrace of Christ was not a sudden conversion but a gradual, inevitable evolution, a quiet transformation as significant as any battle they fought. When the first Norse warriors arrived, they carried with them the beliefs of their homelands, a mythology of gods who lived in a great hall called Valhalla and who valued courage above all else. In the echoing spaces of the Hagia Sophia, however, they encountered a different kind of divine majesty, one expressed not in epic poems of battle, but in shimmering mosaics, haunting chants, and the intricate rituals of the Orthodox Church. To serve an emperor who was not just a political leader, but also the defender of the faith and God's representative on earth, created a powerful social pressure. Formal conversion became a practical step, a way to fully participate in the society they were paid to protect. Baptism was the gateway. For a young guardsman, this ceremony would have been a profound experience, a ritual of rebirth that washed away his old pagan identity and welcomed him into the spiritual community of the empire. He would receive a Christian name, perhaps a Greek one, to be used in official contexts, though his brothers in the guard likely still called him by his Norse name in their quarters. This dual naming captures the essence of their transformation. They were becoming something new without fully abandoning what they were. Their faith, however, often retained a distinct Norse character. Historians suggest they may have had their own churches, where services were conducted with a familiar sensibility, perhaps even incorporating elements of their northern traditions in the veneration of saints who embodied warrior virtues. Saint Olaf of Norway, a king and a warrior, became a particularly popular patron among them, a bridge figure who understood both the cross and the axe. This personalized Christianity allowed them to integrate into the empire's spiritual fabric without being swallowed by it. Their religious commitment became another strand in the bond with the emperor, but it was a personal strand, not a political one. They were devout for the sake of their own souls and their oath, not to gain favor with a Greek bishop or to navigate the complex rivalries of the patriarchal court. In this way, their faith mirrored their military service, direct, personal, and focused on the figure of the emperor as the pinnacle of both earthly and divine order. This religious evolution completed their integration as the ultimate imperial instrument. They were now defenders of the faith as well as defenders of the throne, yet they remained, at their core, a brotherhood apart, ensuring that even in prayer, their ultimate loyalty was never divided. This self-contained brotherhood required its own leader, a man who could bridge the worlds of the imperial court and the northern longhouse. That crucial figure was the Acolythos, a title that translates simply to the follower or the attendant. His selection was a masterstroke of imperial psychology. The emperor never appointed an outsider, a Greek general or a court eunuch, to command these fiercely independent warriors. Instead, he always chose the Acolythos from within the guard's own ranks. This was a profound gesture of trust and understanding. The new commander was a man who had stood the same watches, endured the same campaigns, and sworn the same oath as the men he now led. He spoke their language literally and culturally. He knew the weight of their axes and the nuances of their honor code. When he gave an order, it carried the authority of a brother, not just a bureaucrat. This ensured that discipline flowed from respect, not from fear of a foreign overlord. The Acolythos became the emperor's direct conduit, the only link in a very short chain of command. He took the emperor's wishes and translated them into terms his men would follow without question, while also representing the guard's needs and perspectives back to the throne. It was a system designed for flawless, frictionless execution. Beneath this single, trusted leader, the guard governed itself. They were not subject to the sprawling Byzantine legal code for their internal affairs. Disputes between guardsmen, matters of pay, or breaches of their own codes were settled internally, judged by their own veterans according to the customs they had brought from the north. This autonomy was vital. It meant the emperor did not have to waste his time adjudicating a brawl between two Norsemen over a gambling debt or a perceived insult. More importantly, it reinforced their separation from the society around them. A Varangian answered to his own chieftain and his own laws, creating a judicial island within the empire. This self-regulation fostered an incredible esprit de corps, a powerful sense of brotherhood. Their loyalty was not just to the distant figure of the emperor, but to the man standing next to them in the shield wall. They lived together, were judged by their own, and were led by one of their own. This closed circle created a unit of phenomenal cohesion. In a crisis, they did not need complex orders or lengthy explanations. They moved as one body, trusting their Acolythos and trusting each other, because their entire world was built upon that specific, reinforced trust. For the emperor, this was the final piece of operational genius. He purchased not just 6,000 individual swords, but a single, perfectly crafted instrument. By granting them internal autonomy under a leader he personally appointed, he minimized micromanagement and maximized reliability. The guard policed itself, motivated itself, and bound itself together, allowing the emperor to focus on ruling an empire, secure in the knowledge that the mechanism of his personal safety was in expert, self-sustaining hands. The true genius of the guard's design becomes clear only when we place them beside the empire's other elite soldiers, the professional regiments known as the Tagmata. While both were formidable forces, their roles and their relationship to power were fundamentally, deliberately different. The Tagmata were the empire's standing army, its permanent professional corps. Recruited from within Byzantine territories, these men were the products of the empire's own military system, masters of complex tactics and disciplined maneuver. They were the shield of the realm, deployed to defend borders and crush external threats. Yet this very strength contained a latent danger. A Tagmata regiment, though loyal to the emperor, was ultimately part of a broader military hierarchy. Its officers were Greek aristocrats, men with deep roots in provincial power structures. A successful general commanding a Tagmatic army could, and sometimes did, see that army as a ladder to the throne itself. Their loyalty, while professional, was not inherently personal or permanent in the way the emperor needed at his very doorstep. This is where the Varangians occupied a separate category entirely. In simple terms, they began as mercenaries, foreign fighters hired for a specific task. But to call them just mercenaries by the height of their service is to miss the profound evolution of their role. Ordinary mercenaries are temporary, their loyalty lasting only as long as their contract and their pay. The Varangian Guard became permanent, institutionalized, woven into the very fabric of the palace. Their oath was not a contract for a single campaign, it was a lifelong bond to the person of the emperor. This transformed them from hired swords into a fixed pillar of the state, an office as enduring as the throne itself. While the Tagmata were instruments of imperial policy across the empire, the Varangians were instruments of imperial survival within the palace walls. Their value was defined by proximity, both physical and political. They slept near the emperor's chambers, they stood beside his throne. They were the final, silent witnesses to his most private counsels. The Tagmatic soldier's primary loyalty was to the command structure and the defense of the empire's territory. The Varangian guardsman's only loyalty was to the individual wearing the crown. This created a brilliant, stable tension. The Tagmata represented the military might of the Byzantine state, a necessary force that also required careful political management. The Varangian Guard represented the personal might of the Byzantine emperor, a counterforce designed specifically to manage that very necessity. An emperor could send his Tagmatic armies to the frontiers with confidence, knowing his personal security at home rested on a force that those armies could not influence or intimidate. The Guard was the ultimate check on military ambition, a living reminder to every general that even if he commanded 10,000 men on the frontier, the heart of power was protected by men who answered to no one else. It was a system of balances where the external defenders of the empire and the internal guardians of the ruler were kept deliberately separate, ensuring that ambition in one sphere could not easily corrupt the other. Yet this absolute loyalty carried a hidden cost, a flaw woven into the very fabric of their strength. Their allegiance was a laser, focused solely on the individual who wore the crown and paid their wages. This meant they felt no inherent duty to the abstract concept of the Roman state, to its ancient laws, or to the well-being of its citizens. In the eyes of a Varangian guardsman, an order from the emperor was not a subject for debate. It was the culmination of his purpose. This turned them into the perfect, and sometimes terrifying, instrument of raw imperial will, regardless of its justice. When the crowded streets of Constantinople erupted in protest, often over bread prices or heavy taxes, the emperor's response was not to send in the city watch or the local garrison, whose soldiers might sympathize with their neighbors. He sent in the Varangians. To the mob, these towering foreigners were not fellow Romans airing a grievance. They were a faceless, merciless force of repression. The guardsmen would advance in a solid wall, their great axes not just symbols now but tools for clearing streets. Their actions, while effective in restoring order, were devoid of any political nuance or local mercy. They were there to break the disturbance, not to understand its cause. This could transform a tense but manageable situation into a bloody tragedy, deepening the rift between the palace and the people. For the emperor, this was a calculated trade-off. The immediate security of his throne was worth the simmering resentment of the city's inhabitants. The Varangians provided a kind of political insulation, allowing the ruler to enforce unpopular decisions without relying on soldiers who might hesitate or question. But this insulation could also breed a dangerous isolation. An emperor surrounded only by men who never said no, who executed every command without a whisper of the broader consequences, could lose touch with the very empire he was supposed to govern. The Guard's loyalty guaranteed his personal safety, but it did nothing to guarantee his wise rule. It was a shield that could also become a blindfold, protecting the man while sometimes harming the state he led. Their value was inseparable from their indifference, a double-edged axe that cut both ways. The echoes of their service were captured in two very different kinds of stories. Far to the north, in the firelit halls of Iceland and Norway, skalds wove tales where the ultimate adventure was not a local feud, but a journey to Miklagard. The Sagas, those epic family chronicles, treated service in the Varangian Guard as the highest possible credential for a hero. In the saga of Harald Hardrada, perhaps the most famous example, the future king of Norway spends years as a young man fighting for the Byzantine emperor. The saga recounts his exploits in lavish detail, from clever military stratagems to accumulating a legendary hoard of gold. For the audience listening, this was not just a biography, it was a blueprint for glory. It framed Constantinople not as a foreign capital, but as the ultimate arena where a Norse warrior could test his worth and be rewarded beyond his wildest dreams. The wealth he brought back was proof, and the stories themselves became a powerful recruiting tool, perpetuating the cycle of young men heading east for their own chance at saga-worthy fame. Meanwhile, in the libraries of Constantinople, a very different kind of record was being kept. Byzantine historians observed the Varangians not as heroes of a personal journey, but as fascinating components of their own imperial machine. The most vivid account comes from Anna Komnene, the brilliant daughter of Emperor Alexios I. In her history, the Alexiad, she describes the Guard with the meticulous eye of a scholar. She notes their immense size, their ferocity in battle, and their curious customs. She writes of them almost as a force of nature, a human phenomenon to be documented. Her tone is one of respectful awe, but it is the awe of an insider looking at a supremely effective, yet ultimately foreign, instrument. She does not tell their personal stories, she analyzes their function. Where the sagas celebrate individual ambition, the chronicles analyze collective utility. This creates a remarkable gift for us centuries later. We are not left with just one perspective. We have the insider view from the Byzantine court, detailing what the Guard did and how they fit into the political architecture of the empire. And we have the outsider view from the Norse world, detailing why a man would go, what he hoped to gain, and how he remembered the experience. It is like seeing the same event through two different lenses. The Byzantine lens shows us the mechanism, the cold, brilliant logic of the system. The Norse lens shows us the human fuel that made the mechanism run, the dreams of gold, honor, and a story worth telling back home. Together, they provide a stereoscopic, three-dimensional view of history. We understand not only the emperor's political calculation, but also the young warrior's personal gamble. We see the Varangian Guard not as a static institution, but as a living bridge between two worlds, each recording the echo of its footsteps in the language of their own culture. This dual record transforms them from a historical footnote into a full, resonant chapter, reminding us that the past is best understood not by a single voice, but by a conversation between them. A new wave of northerners soon arrived at the gates of Constantinople, but they spoke a different tongue. The year 1066 marked a cataclysm for the warrior class of England, when William of Normandy shattered the Anglo-Saxon armies at the Battle of Hastings. With their king fallen and their lands claimed by the conquerors, thousands of skilled English fighters found themselves displaced, their world turned upside down. For these men, the road to a future lay not in submission, but in exile. Their gaze turned east, following the same river routes their Viking ancestors had once used, toward the one place known to value formidable warriors regardless of their origin. The empire, ever pragmatic, saw not refugees but a fresh reservoir of talent. The Varangian Guard opened its ranks, and a significant contingent of Anglo-Saxon warriors was absorbed into its storied brotherhood. This was not a replacement of the Norse element, but a fascinating fusion. For decades, the barracks of the Guard echoed with both Old Norse and Old English. a blend of two closely related cultures now united by a shared experience of loss and a common search for honorable employment. These Englishmen brought their own distinct military traditions, perhaps a greater emphasis on disciplined infantry formations learned from years of fighting the Danes and the Normans themselves. They were, like the Norse before them, perfectly suited for the Guard's purpose. They were foreigners, yes, but more importantly, they were politically sterile in the Byzantine context. They had no connections to the powerful families of Anatolia or Thrace, no hidden loyalties to any faction in the imperial court. Their only allegiance was to the emperor, who offered them shelter, purpose, and gold. Their integration proved the system's brilliant adaptability. The essential qualification was not Scandinavian blood, but a state of being utterly disconnected from local power structures. A displaced Anglo-Saxon noble, stripped of his English estates, fit this requirement as perfectly as any landless younger son from Sweden. The Guard became a mosaic of northern warrior cultures, bound together by their outsider status and their collective oath. This chapter highlights a subtle truth about the empire's logic. The Guard was never about preserving a pure Norse identity. It was about maintaining a pure function. The ethnicity of the Axemen was secondary. The unwavering nature of their loyalty was everything. As long as the recruits came from beyond the empire's tangled web of politics, spoke a language of direct honor, and fought with relentless courage, they were welcome. The Anglo-Saxon influx reinforced the Guard as an idea, a professional haven for the militarily gifted who had nowhere else to go. It showed that the bargain first struck by Basil II was not a one-time deal with a specific people, but a renewable contract with a specific type of person, the honorable outsider. This adaptability would become the Guard's greatest strength, allowing it to evolve and endure for centuries, even as the world that first created it began to fade into history. The golden age of the Guard could not last forever, and its decline began not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet shift in imperial priorities. By the 12th century, the Byzantine Empire was a different beast than the one Basil II had ruled. Its borders were more fluid, its enemies more diverse, and its treasury often strained by constant warfare. Emperors began to look for more flexible and, crucially, less expensive military solutions. They turned increasingly to other mercenary groups, like the Turcopoles, light cavalry recruited from Turkish populations, who were cheaper to equip and maintain than the heavily armored Varangians. These new units were specialists for specific kinds of warfare, but their rise signaled a change in philosophy. The Guard was no longer the only, or even the most cost-effective, foreign tool in the imperial arsenal. Its members remained elite, their loyalty unquestioned, but the sheer economic weight of maintaining such a lavish, permanent force became harder for struggling emperors to justify. The Varangians were a premium instrument, and the empire was starting to budget for more practical tools. This gradual sidelining was a process of erosion, a slow leak in the vessel of their prestige. Yet they remained a formidable relic of a grander era, stationed at the heart of a city whose fortunes were themselves beginning to falter. Then came the cataclysm that no oath could withstand. The year 1204 is a scar on the history of Constantinople, and it was the final, brutal test of the Varangian Guard. When the armies of the Fourth Crusade, wildly off course from their intended target, turned their fury on the Christian city, the Guard stood to meet them. They fought with their characteristic ferocity at the sea walls and in the streets, their great axes cutting down knights and infantry alike. But they were defending a city riven by internal political chaos, led by an emperor who had already fled. The defenses crumbled and the Crusaders poured in. The sack that followed was an orgy of destruction that lasted for days. The great palace was looted, the churches desecrated, and the city's accumulated wealth over 9 centuries was stripped away. In this maelstrom, the institution of the Guard was shattered. Their home was destroyed, their employer gone, and the very treasury that paid them was emptied. Many likely fell in the fighting. Others may have been captured or dispersed, their famous brotherhood broken by an event so catastrophic it rewrote the map of the world. The axe that had protected emperors for centuries was finally knocked from its grip. In the decades that followed, the Byzantine Empire was pieced back together, but it was a shadow of its former self. The so-called Empire of Nicaea, one of the successor states, did revive the title and unit of the Varangian Guard. Men still served with honor under the new emperors, but the context had utterly changed. They were no longer the awe-inspiring centerpiece of the world's greatest city, but a respected unit in a smaller, poorer, and constantly threatened realm. The political logic that created them, the need for a lavish, detached personal guard for a supremely wealthy autocrat, had evaporated with the empire's power and riches. They were a living tradition, a proud memory, but the golden engine that drove their legend was gone. Their story after 1204 is one of dignified twilight, a slow fading from the central stage of history, their echoes growing fainter until they were finally absorbed into the silence of the past. The political logic that created the Varangians did not vanish with the fall of Constantinople. It proved to be a timeless principle, one that would be recognized and reinvented by empires yet to come. The idea of a ruler's personal guard, deliberately crafted from outsiders, became a powerful blueprint for security, echoing far beyond the walls of the great palace. Perhaps the most famous successor to this concept emerged in the very empire that would eventually conquer the Byzantine remnant. The Ottoman sultans created the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force that became the backbone of their military for centuries. On the surface, the Janissaries were a stark contrast to the Norse axemen. They were not free warriors seeking fortune, but young boys taken through a system known as the Devshirme, a tribute of children from Christian communities within the expanding Ottoman realm. These boys were raised as Muslims, educated, and rigorously trained from childhood to be soldiers utterly loyal to the Sultan. Yet the core strategic insight was identical to that of the Byzantine emperors. Like the Varangians, the Janissaries were intentionally severed from the society they served. They had no family ties to the Turkish aristocracy, no landed estates that could breed independent power, and their entire identity was forged in service to the throne. Their loyalty was not to a tribe or a region, but to the institution of the Sultanate itself. This created a formidable counterweight to the traditional Turkish cavalry nobles, ensuring the ruler had a military force answerable only to him. While the methods of recruitment were worlds apart, the underlying goal was the same: to build a shield of loyalty that was impervious to the internal politics of the realm. The model demonstrated that the need for a politically sterile guardian was a recurring challenge of autocratic power. Closer to the Norse homelands, the legacy lived on in name and function. In the fledgling principalities of Kiev and Rus, the rulers who had once sent warriors to Constantinople continued the tradition themselves. They employed companies of Varangians, as they were called in the Slavic tongue, as their own personal retinues and elite shock troops. These warriors served Russian princes as trusted enforcers and military advisors, their reputation for steadfastness and martial skill making them valuable assets in the turbulent consolidation of the early Russian state. Here, the concept was less about creating political separation, as the Rus princes were themselves of partly Norse descent, and more about accessing a recognized standard of military excellence. The name Varangian became synonymous with elite professional loyalty, a brand that retained its value long after the original unit in Constantinople had faded. This enduring influence reveals a profound truth about power. The Varangian model was not just a historical curiosity, it was a proven solution to a perennial problem. How does a sovereign protect himself from the very instruments of his own rule? The answer: demonstrated over 3 centuries in Byzantium, was to create a separate class of defender, one whose fortunes are so completely tied to the ruler's survival that their interests become inseparable. It is the strategic cultivation of absolute dependence. By ensuring his guards had no roots in the native power structure, an emperor or a sultan could sleep soundly, knowing that the men at his door had no other family, no other patron, and no other future except the one he provided. This cold calculus of trust, first perfected with Norse axes and Byzantine gold, would shape the guardrooms of palaces for centuries to come, a silent testament to the enduring power of the outsider's oath. The story of the guard is written not only in Chronicles and Sagas, but in the physical objects they left behind. Scattered across Scandinavia, buried in the earth for centuries, lie the most direct evidence of their legendary wealth, vast hoards of Byzantine gold coins. These are not random collections of treasure, but purposeful savings, the accumulated pay of a lifetime of service sent home for safekeeping. A single hoard might contain hundreds, even thousands, of those heavy gold numismata, each one a month's wage for a guardsman. They are a silent, powerful testament to the economic current that flowed north, transforming families and funding the great halls back in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. This was the promise of Miklagard made solid, proof that the stories of streets paved with gold were more than just metaphor. For archaeologists today, each coin is a data point, mapping the trade routes of trust that connected the fjords to the Bosphorus. Beyond the glitter of gold, the trail grows fainter but no less fascinating. In the dry, meticulous language of Byzantine legal and administrative documents, we catch fleeting, official glimpses of their lives. A fragmentary tax record might note an exemption granted to a property owned by the guard. A court document could reference their unique right to internal justice, acknowledging their separation from local law. Most telling are the payroll registers, the bureaucratic ledgers that list payments issued to the regiment. These dry lists are profoundly human documents. They confirm that the famed salary was not a myth, but a regular, reliable transaction. They formalize the bargain, showing us the empire's administrative machinery diligently fueling the engine of loyalty. Each parchment scrap is a snapshot of the system in operation, the empire methodically purchasing its own security, one gold coin at a time. Perhaps the most tantalizing mystery lies in the very streets of Istanbul. Where exactly did the Varangians live? The search for their barracks, their scaly as they might have called it, continues to captivate archaeologists. Historical sources suggest their quarters were near the Great Palace, a logical placement for the emperor's immediate protectors. Some researchers point to a district known as the Vlaanga near the sea walls, a name that intriguingly echoes the word Varangian. Excavations have uncovered foundations of substantial buildings from the right period, but a definitive link remains elusive. The challenge is that they did not build in a distinct foreign style. They lived in Roman structures, adapting them to their needs. Their home would have been a Scandinavian enclave within a Roman shell, a place where Norse was spoken, northern customs were observed, and axes were polished. Finding it would be like discovering the physical heart of their brotherhood, the place where they were off duty, where the armor came off and the stories of home were shared. It is a puzzle of stone and memory waiting for a key discovery. Each of these fragments, the coin in the soil, the line in a ledger, the outline of a foundation, is a piece of a grand reconstruction. Together, they help us move beyond the epic battles and political theory to touch the daily reality of these men. We begin to see the rhythm of their lives, the weight of the gold in their palms after a month's guard duty, the feel of a familiar bunk in a distant city, the sound of their own language in the barracks after a long day of silence in Greek-speaking halls. They were not mythical figures, but professionals navigating a long-term contract in a foreign land, maintaining their identity while fulfilling a singular, vital purpose. The archaeological traces, however sparse, ground their legendary status in the tangible world of commerce, administration, and community. They remind us that history is built not only on the deeds of emperors, but on the accumulated choices and quiet moments of the individuals who stood guard at the crossroads of the world. The sagas tell us of heroes, but the payroll ledgers tell us of professionals. This is the crucial line that separates the romantic myth of the Varangian Guard from its grounded historical reality. Popular stories, both ancient and modern, love the image of the lone Viking adventurer, a fierce warrior seeking glory in a foreign land, answering to no law but his own axe. While that archetype certainly fueled the journey east, the moment a man passed through the gates of Constantinople and took his oath, he ceased to be a wandering freebooter. He became an employee of the Roman state, a cog in the most sophisticated bureaucratic machine of the medieval world. His life was no longer a saga of personal quests, but a regimen of scheduled duties, regulated pay, and a clear, unbreakable chain of command. The gold he earned was not random plunder, but a salary, issued with reliable regularity from the imperial treasury, recorded by clerks on official registers. He had specific posts to guard, precise protocols for palace ceremonies, and a standardized kit of equipment provided by the state. This transformation from mythic adventurer to salaried professional is the true heart of their story. The empire was not hiring chaos, it was purchasing order. It sought not the unpredictable fury of a berserker, but the dependable, disciplined strength of a guardsman who understood that his ferocity was a tool to be deployed only at the command of his Acolythos and his emperor. Their legendary axes were not symbols of anarchic violence, but of authorized, institutional force. Think of it this way: the difference between a thrilling story and a working system. The sagas celebrate the exceptional moment, the single act of insane bravery that turns a battle. The Byzantine administration, however, was built to ensure 10,000 ordinary moments of unwavering vigilance. It valued the guard who stood motionless for hours at the palace gate without fail, the man who followed a complex rotation of watches without complaint, the unit that moved as one cohesive body on parade, projecting an image of seamless, impersonal power. Individual heroism was appreciated and rewarded, of course, but it was the collective, machine-like reliability of the guard that made it indispensable. A ruler could not base his personal security on the chance that today his guards would feel heroic. He needed the certainty that they would simply do their jobs every single day with flawless precision. This institutional discipline is what allowed them to function as more than just fighters. They were tax enforcers, ceremonial display units, and trusted couriers because they followed orders with a consistency that local troops, entangled in social networks, sometimes could not match. Their true power lay not in how wildly they could swing an axe, but in how calmly and predictably they could stand their ground. They were a human wall, engineered and maintained by the state, and that required a bureaucracy of loyalty just as much as it required courage. Appreciating this distinction lifts the Varangians from the realm of pure adventure into the realm of historical genius. They were not a happy accident of history, but a calculated, sustained investment. The emperors understood that to build the ultimate shield, you needed more than sharp steel and strong arms. You needed a system, a salary, and a structure that turned northern honor into Byzantine order. The sagas gave them their legend, but the payroll ledgers gave them their purpose. This relationship between the emperor and his guards can be framed as a timeless puzzle of power. Political scientists call it the principal-agent problem, a dilemma faced by any leader who must delegate authority. The principal, in this case the Byzantine emperor, needs reliable agents to carry out his will, whether they are generals, administrators, or bodyguards. The core challenge is that these agents often have their own interests, which may not align perfectly with those of the leader. A general might want more land for his family, a tax collector might seek personal bribes, and a local guardsman might prioritize the safety of his own neighborhood over the emperor's command. This misalignment creates risk, inefficiency, and the constant potential for betrayal. For a ruler in Constantinople surrounded by elaborate plots, this was not an abstract theory, it was a daily threat to his life and throne. His entire reign was an exercise in managing this problem. The native military and aristocracy were agents with deeply rooted competing interests, their webs of family loyalty and land ownership creating a perpetual divergence from the emperor's singular goal, personal survival and stable rule. The genius of the Varangian Guard was that it solved this problem with breathtaking elegance. The emperor, as the principal, selected agents, the Norse axemen, whose interests were engineered to be perfectly aligned with his own. How was this alignment achieved? Through a system of strategic alienation. The guards were intentionally kept outside of Byzantine society. They had no land within the empire that could be threatened or used as a bargaining chip by rivals. They had no family connections in the Senate or the church that could pull their loyalties in another direction. Their social, economic, and political existence was entirely contained within the framework of their service. This meant their sole interest was the continued health and favor of the emperor himself. His survival guaranteed their pay, their prestige, and their purpose. His fall would mean the end of their privileged world. The principal agent problem was minimized because the agents had no alternative patrons, no competing priorities, and no exit strategy other than honorable service or death. This was institutional design of the highest order. It recognized that supreme loyalty is rarely born from patriotism or ideology alone, but can be manufactured through a structure of mutual dependence. The emperor did not just hire mercenaries, he constructed an entire ecosystem of incentive where betrayal became not just dishonorable, but illogical. For the guardsmen, switching sides offered no advantage, as any rival faction within the empire would inherently distrust him as a foreigner and could not offer him a more secure or lucrative position than the emperor already provided. The system created a closed loop of trust where the agent's best possible outcome was inextricably linked to the principal's success. This case study reaches far beyond the walls of the Great Palace. It offers a lens for understanding power dynamics in any complex organization, from modern corporations to governments. The lesson is not about hiring foreigners, but about the strategic management of allegiance. When a leader identifies a critical function like personal security or a sensitive audit, they often seek agents whose interests are isolated from the internal politics of the organization. They look for individuals or units with a singular focus, insulated from competing social pressures, and rewarded in a way that ties their fortune directly to the success of the mission. The Varangian model demonstrates that sometimes the most reliable ally is not the one with the deepest roots in the system, but the one whose entire stake in the game is the leader who placed them there. It is a reminder that loyalty, in the most strategic sense, can be architected through a careful balance of reward, isolation, and purpose. This cold calculus, perfected with axe and gold, reveals a profound truth about safeguarding authority in a world of competing interests. A gold coin and a runic carving tell only part of the tale. Behind the institution of the Guard stood thousands of individual lives, each a story of choices made in the space between two worlds. These were not faceless automata, but young men, often in their late teens or early 20s, who committed to a path that would define their entire adulthood. They left behind the familiar shores of the north, knowing they might never see them again, trading the certainty of home for the glittering uncertainty of Miklagard. For them, the journey east was not a historical footnote. It was the pivotal decision of a lifetime, a voluntary exile chosen in pursuit of honor and fortune. Once they passed through the city's mighty gates and swore their oath, they entered a new existence, one stretched taut between the culture they carried within them and the dazzling, alien society they now served. Their daily reality was a study in contrasts, wielding immense authority in the palace while remaining cultural outsiders in the city's bustling markets. They lived this duality for decades, their identities slowly woven from both Norse thread and Byzantine silk. Over the years, the rigid lines of their foreignness inevitably softened. While the core of the Guard remained a self-contained brotherhood, some members put down deeper roots. They formed relationships, sometimes marrying local women, perhaps daughters of merchants or artisans from the city's diverse population. These unions created a new, hybrid generation. Children would be born in Constantinople who heard stories of northern gods and heroes from their fathers, while being raised in the rhythms and faith of the Eastern Roman world. These families existed in a unique social space, connected to the prestige and protection of the Guard, yet living within the vibrant tapestry of the city itself. A guardsman might raise a son who could speak both Greek and the Old Norse tongue, a boy who understood the solemnity of the Orthodox liturgy but also knew the sagas of his father's homeland. This blending of worlds was the quiet, human counterpoint to the Guard's official role as detached enforcers, a natural consequence of men building lives during long years of service. This life carried a profound emotional weight, a mixture of towering prestige and deep-seated loneliness. A Varangian guardsman walked the halls of power, stood beside the emperor, and was respected, even feared, by the highest aristocracy. He wore the finest armor and carried wealth beyond the dreams of most men. Yet, in quieter moments, he was an ocean away from everything he first knew. The smell of the sea might be the same, but the language in the streets was a constant murmur of the unfamiliar. The food, the festivals, the very stars in the sky would have felt different. He celebrated victories with his brothers in arms, but could not easily share his triumphs with the family of his childhood. His high station was built upon a foundation of permanent displacement. This tension between honor and homesickness is a timeless human experience, one shared by soldiers, diplomats, and migrants throughout history. The runic graffiti in the Hagia Sophia, like Hafton's simple declaration, is perhaps less a vandal's mark and more a poignant shout into the silence, a way for a man to assert his own name and origin in a place that could otherwise swallow his identity whole. Their personal stories are, for the most part, lost to the erosion of centuries. We know the legends of kings like Harald Hardrada, but not the quiet journeys of the common guardsman who served loyally for 20 years, sent his gold home to a sister in Norway, and found solace in a small family within the city. Yet, in that loss, we find a universal truth. The saga of the Varangian Guard is not just a political or military history. It is a human story on an epic scale. It is about migration, the age-old search for a better life beyond the horizon. It is about service, the commitment to a cause and a leader that gives purpose. And most deeply, it is about identity, the lifelong project of understanding who you are when you live between two cultures, forever shaped by both, yet never fully belonging to either. These men navigated extraordinary circumstances, balancing the fierce loyalty of a warrior with the adaptable heart of a settler. They remind us that history's grandest systems and most brilliant strategies are ultimately powered by the choices, sacrifices, and quiet resilience of individuals. We see the glittering system of gold and axes, but we must listen for the echoes of the men who made it work, those who lived their entire lives as the vital, human bridge between the misty north and the golden city on the Bosphorus. The true number of warriors who stood guard at the height of their power remains one of history's quiet secrets. Estimates for the Varangian Guard at its peak range dramatically, from a few thousand to a force of 6,000 or more. This is not just a matter of academic tally, it speaks to the very nature of their role. Were they an elite, compact corps of a few hundred, stationed only at the palace gates and the emperor's side? Or were they a small army, a division capable of being split to garrison key points in the city or form the core of a battlefield formation? The Chronicles give us snapshots like the initial 6,000 sent by Vladimir, or reports of them fighting in specific battles, but a consistent, official roster has not survived. The answer likely lies somewhere in the middle, fluctuating with the empire's wealth and immediate needs. A strong, secure emperor might maintain a smaller, more ceremonial guard. An emperor facing civil war or external threats would likely expand the unit rapidly, drawing on the steady stream of northern recruits. Their size was a living number, a direct reflection of the empire's political pulse and the depth of the imperial treasury at any given moment. This ambiguity keeps the scale of their presence an open question, a ghostly regiment whose full strength we can only glimpse in fragments. Equally elusive are the precise workings of their internal law. We know they governed themselves, judged by their own veterans according to the customs of the North. But what did that courtroom look like? Was it a formal gathering in their barracks presided over by the Acolythos or a council of elders? Or was justice dispensed more directly in the manner of a thing, the traditional Norse assembly? The types of disputes they handled would have ranged from the mundane to the severe, arguments over pay or gambling debts, accusations of theft within the brotherhood, or breaches of their solemn oath. The punishments are another mystery. Fines paid in gold numismata seem likely for lesser offenses, but what of graver violations like cowardice in battle or betrayal of trust? The Norse world had its own concepts of penalty, from outlawry to more severe sanctions. Yet within the walls of Constantinople, they operated under the emperor's ultimate authority. Did their internal system have the final power of life and death, or were certain extreme cases referred to the imperial court? The silence of the record here is profound. It suggests a system so effective and so private that it rarely, if ever, created a document that entered the Byzantine bureaucratic stream. Their justice was a closed circle, a necessary autonomy that preserved their unity but left no detailed manual for us to find. Perhaps the most human mystery is the question of their hearts. To what degree did these men, over decades of service and across generations, truly become Romans? The runes in the Hagia Sophia shout a connection to home, while their conversion to Christianity and service to the throne pulled them into the fabric of the empire. For the first generation, assimilation was likely shallow, a practical adoption of faith and function while maintaining a distinct Norse identity in their private lives. But for their sons, those born in the city to guardsmen and local mothers, the calculation was different. These children grew up in a hybrid world, speaking Greek in the streets and perhaps hearing old stories in a fading northern tongue at home. Their loyalty might still be to the guard as their father's institution, but their cultural reference points were increasingly those of Constantinople. Over a century or more, did the Guard slowly transform from a Scandinavian enclave into a more blended, professional Roman unit that simply cherished a unique origin story? Or did it deliberately maintain its outsider character through continuous recruitment and strict internal customs, resisting assimilation because that very separation was its purpose? The evidence points both ways, suggesting a slow, inevitable blending at the edges, while a core tradition of northern identity was fiercely maintained. This tension between becoming and remaining is the silent drama of their daily lives, a personal journey for each man that history summarizes in a single, unanswered question. These enduring gaps in the record are not failures of history but invitations. They are what keep the story of the Varangian Guard from being a closed book, and turn it into an ongoing conversation. Every archaeological dig in Istanbul that uncovers a new district, every re-examination of a faded payroll fragment, every linguistic analysis of a runic inscription is an attempt to answer these whispers from the past. The mysteries remind us that our understanding of history is always a reconstruction, a best guess based on the pieces that time has chosen not to erase. They invite us to look closer, to wonder about the individual faces behind the axes, and to appreciate that some of the most compelling truths about the human experience, about loyalty, identity, and belonging, are often found not in the clear answers, but in the respectful silence between them. The Varangian god stands as a testament to a radical and brilliant solution to the eternal problem of power. Who can the ruler truly trust? For over 3 centuries, Byzantine emperors answered that question not with their kin or countrymen, but with axe-bearing foreigners from the distant north. Their story is a powerful narrative of calculated trust, cultural exchange, and the lengths to which leaders will go to secure their throne. It reminds us that loyalty is often most reliably found not in shared blood, but in shared interest and sacred oath. This was not a story of simple mercenaries for hire, but of an institution engineered for absolute reliability, a human fortress built on the twin foundations of golden incentive and unbreakable honor. The emperors of Constantinople understood a profound and timeless truth, that the surest shield is often held by the hand that has nothing else to hold onto. In the silent, imposing presence of the Varangian, the throne found a purity of purpose that the tangled web of court politics could never provide. Their legacy echoes in the quiet questions of leadership and security that resonate through the centuries, a reminder that sometimes to protect the heart of an empire, you must look beyond its borders. If you found this journey into the heart of Byzantine power intriguing, subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden mechanics, and let us know in the comments which elite military unit you would like us to explore next.